For our second paper, Dr. Bethany Sollereder is a lecturer in science and religion at the University of Edinburgh. She specializes in theology concerning evolution and the problem of suffering, and Bethany is currently working on the theological aspects of restoration ecology. Bethany received her PhD in theology from the University of Exeter and an MCS in interdisciplinary studies from Regent College, Vancouver. She's the author of God, Evolution, and Animal Suffering, Theodicy Without a Fall, and Why Is There Suffering? Pick Your Own Theological Expedition. Her title, Pentecostal Meets Process, a Pluralist Model of Divine Action. Please welcome Bethany Sollereder.
When people ask me what brand of Christian I am, I never know how to answer them. The most honest answer, that I'm a charismatic, evangelical, Anglo-Catholic, doesn't seem to clarify things much. And I have a similar problem when it comes to my theology. I'm often branded a process or open theist, and I tend to think, yes. Well, except for the moments I'm a classical Thomist, or, well, except for the very odd occasion when I'm reformed, however that happened. Or maybe even, well, yes, from Monday to Thursday most weeks. So this paper is an attempt for me to turn my general condition of theological rootlessness or multiple denominational identities into a constructive model instead of just being its usual confused mess. So two of those formational identities for me have been the Pentecostal movement and the influence of open and relational theologies. It was during my time at a Pentecostal Bible college that I first came across the works of Pinnock and Sanders and Rice and Hasker and began to explore the sort of theological possibilities of a temporal existence for God and all that that entailed. Then during my PhD, I spent a good deal of time on the question of divine action and was deeply influenced by a number of process thinkers, including a number of those who are sitting in this audience today. Finally, last year, I moved in a full circle and I began to read about Pentecostal ontologies of divine action, primarily the works of Amos Young and of James K.A. Smith. Now, in Smith's article, Is the Universe Open to Surprise?, he articulates one of the main issues with a Pentecostal theory of divine action. He writes, a Pentecostal contribution to the dialogue of divine action would inevitably be gauche, precisely because it would transgress an unspoken taboo in the parlor of the conversation, that one not question the science side of the conversation, and in particular, not ruin the party by calling into question the governing naturalistic assumptions of science. Now, Smith worries that the admission of Pentecostals into discussions of divine action would be to let in a rather rowdy bunch. So he offers his Pentecostal approach of enchanted naturalism in the hopes of avoiding such an awkward scene. Smith is from Ontario, from the cultured, enlightened, polite part of Canada. I'm from Alberta, very much the Wild West, where we love an awkward scene and a rowdy bunch. And perhaps that's why I've found both Smith and Amos Young's proposals a little too polite, too conceding to the general philosophical timber of divine action debate today, not sufficiently Pentecostal. So as a short summary, Smith argues that a Pentecostal ontology involves a radical openness that rules out metaphysical naturalism, that there is nothing but material reality, but should also rule out the sort of dualistic or deistic supernaturalisms that are common amongst Pentecostal believers. So he vouches for what he calls a non-interventionist, inspirited naturalism, which goes by the name enchanted naturalism. So in this sense, the material world is suspended in the Spirit's participatory work, kind of like salt dissolved in water. So the currents of the Spirit's work naturally affect the material world's being. He writes, "Phenomena described as miraculous are not instances of God breaking into the world, as if God were outside it prior to such events. They are instances of a unique and special mode of participation that always already characterizes creation," end quote. Now, I agree. And yet, it is this unique and special mode of participation that needs explaining. Why did God change what God was already doing? So while I'm fully on board with the Spirit's ubiquitous participation with the world, we still need an explanation for when God acts in such a way as to disrupt what David Ray Griffin describes as the normal causal relations of the world. Well, process thought generally involves God in novelty by seeing God as presenting new possibilities which creatures enact. A Pentecostal view sees God both as creating and enacting possibilities, sometimes possibilities that are entirely beyond the abilities of any creaturely entities to enact. So when I use intervention, I mean it in this way: God acting in a way that reverses, revises, or replaces the usual causal relations of things in the world with something else that is entirely beyond the normal powers of the creaturely entities involved. I'm going to simply call those miracles. And I want to present 3 reasons why I think we should put causally disruptive miracles back on the menu of the divine action debate. So first, in the theology and science dialogue, it's often cited that to accept that God could act in ways that are inconsistent with the usual causal relationships of the world would be to overthrow the reliability of science. This is a particular concern of those who were associated with the Divine Action Project led by Robert Russell. Miracles, it is said, would undermine our confidence in science. I disagree. First of all, the amount of what happens in the world that is actually scrutinized in any particularly rigorous way by science is minute. God could interrupt the regular causal relationships in 10,000 ways in this room right now, and neither science nor we would notice. God's interrupting action might overthrow an idealized sort of Popperian science ruled by falsificationism, where a single anomaly could overthrow our understanding of foundational regularities. But in practice, that's never the case. Talk to a practicing scientist, and they will tell you about how hard they tried to do the exact same experiment 10 times, and they ended up with 8 different results, none of which were predicted by the theory. In the very unlikely event that God's miraculous action did disrupt the results of a particular scientific experiment, it would simply be chalked up to an unexplained anomaly, of which there are innumerable examples in day-to-day science. And science would roll straight on, which was a point raised by John Perry and Sarah Lane Ritchie. Usual methodological naturalism in science really can survive the occurrence of miracles. The presumed conflict lies only between Christian belief and an idealized science, not between Christian belief and real science as it's actually practiced. Now, as a side note, I think very much the same things could be said around the arguments about divine hiddenness. A true miracle could always be explained away by those who wish to explain it away. And this is where my model differs from Jamie Smith's suggestion of a Pentecostal ontology. He attempts to imagine, quote, a model of supernaturalism that might not fall prey to aspects of the naturalistic rejection, the ontological concern about interventions and interruptions, end quote. Well, I reject the naturalistic rejection and welcome interruptions and even interventions amongst the various ways God is at work. A second, and really much more important objection to interventionist divine action is rooted in the moral obligations of God to creatures. Philip Clayton and Stephen Knapp have argued that there is a not even once principle, that if God supernaturally intervened in even one case to avert creaturely suffering, God would be morally obliged to do the same in every other instance. Ultimately, God would have to intervene all the time, and thus would undermine any sort of natural order in the world, as well as the ability for creatures to learn about their environment, to interact with each other, and to form relationships. I think that this assumes that all suffering is equal, and that God has the same relationship and therefore the same responsibility to each and every creature. And I do not think that either of those assumptions is true. I think that suffering ought to be evaluated not by how severe it is, but by the possibilities of meaning it holds for the sufferer. So in line with process views, if God creates the possibilities of the future, but usually does not unilaterally decide which ones come to pass, then as long as an instance of suffering has a possible path of redemption, I don't think God would be obligated to stop it from happening, even if God could. Since I believe that redemption can happen post-mortem, the timeline for possible redemption would stretch into eschatological time. So if God acted to stop suffering in one case through a Pentecostal-type miraculous unilateral act, I see no reason to think that other instances of suffering would fall under the exact same set of needs and therefore call for similar divine action. The third objection to interventionist divine action comes from process theology and is simply that intervention would imply coercion. If God is acting in such a way to enact a possibility apart from the work of creaturely agents, this is seen as forcing them to comply, incompatible with love. Here, I want to lean on Thomas Aquinas' view that, quote, God can do something outside this order created by him when he chooses. For instance, by producing the effects of secondary causes without them, or by producing certain effects to which secondary causes do not extend, end quote. So there is no coercion in this view because there is no secondary or natural cause. If God commandeered the secondary causes, forced creatures to do what they had no intention to do, that would be one thing. But to simply cause an effect without the cause at all being involved is simply to add something new into the world, to create ex nihilo within the varied causes of the world. Now, does that make God one cause amongst others? It does. But as God has already done that in the incarnation, we cannot say that this is inappropriate for God to do. When it comes to conscious agents, God could act in ways that coordinate with their desires, but bring things about that are beyond their abilities, such as healings or spiritual gifts or others. And when it comes to inanimate things, I don't think that there's actually a will to contravene in the first place, a departure, I acknowledge, from many process thinkers. I think it is becoming clear why I've called my model pluralist at this point. I draw happily on Pentecostal, process, and Thomist views to articulate the possibility of miraculous divine action. But I would also add that intervention is not the only way God acts. I see the numerous proposals for divine action, whether interventionist, secondary causation, or the various non-interventionist objective types of divine action, NIOTA, top-down, bottom-up, thought-influencing, creative, sustaining proposals is all perfectly reasonable, valid ways to understand how God acts in the world. The consistency, in my view, does not come from the machine-like predictability of God's actions, but in the perfectly consistent nature of God's love for creation. My view accepts a number of uncomfortable positions, though. It means the confusion felt at many Pentecostal prayer meetings, why was this one healed and that one not, remains an unanswered reality, not simply a misunderstanding of the situation. It means that the view held explicitly by my colleague Tom Oord and implicitly by many process theists that there is suffering in the world simply because God cannot stop evil is not, I think, the case. Wesley Wildman's argument from neglect raises its ugly head, that a God who could act and does not is guilty of the worst kind of neglect. These are questions that are not easily solved. I might tentatively advance along the lines of a response like this, that a miracle occurred because the particulars of the situation, the way that it would influence the possibilities of the future, and the invitation of the persons involved all called in harmony for God's action, and God chose to act. But I do not think it can ultimately be reduced to a formula. That might make God seem inconsistent from our perspective, and we may not be able to fully categorize God's action philosophically, but I would offer that the reason for divine action is primarily to lead people, and perhaps all of creation, towards Christ-likeness, and that creating the possibilities of a deeper relationship are more important than consistency in the mechanism of divine action or our ability to schematize when and where divine action can occur. There is and always will be an element of surprise to special divine action, and I hope that a pluralist model can begin to describe its ultimately indescribable character. Thank you.